Good evening, everyone. This is Cheryl Watson Harris, the superintendent of DeKalb. Thank you so much on behalf of the entire team for joining us this evening. And just thank you for all of the leadership that you provide to make our school district the very best place that it can be. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope that you and your families had a wonderful holiday and that everyone is well, doing well. And that the students enjoyed a robust day of virtual instruction today. So we're here this evening to discuss our comprehensive master plan. We know that there have been many conversations, we've had many town halls, but we wanted to make sure that we were able to meet with our parent leadership to have a conversation with you specifically about the comprehensive master plan. So we know that there are other things on your mind. We're hoping that the time that we have this evening can be dedicated to the CMP. We can always have additional meetings as needed. But this evening I'm joined by our members of our leadership team. We have our Deputy Superintendent of Community Empowerment, Innovation, and Partnerships, Ms. Melissa Harris is here with other members of her team handling technology, and kudos to them for that very inspirational video that we've been able to use on multiple occasions, showcasing some of our students and facilities. We also have Hans Williams, who's with us. He is a leader on our operations team and has really been a champion of the entire CMP process. And you may know him also from his leadership around our East Loss programs in general, and just he does a lot of things, including student projections, etc. So we're happy that he's here this evening to be able to answer your questions. And then last but not least, we have Barbara Crum, who's here with members of her team as well from Perkins and Will. They have been our lead partner on the comprehensive master plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team, but we are here, one, to share our where we are currently with the comprehensive master plan, and then to be able to engage in questions and answers via the chat. I think we're going to give some directions around how you can just start to ask your questions as at the start of the meeting. And then how we'll also continue to be in communication for those of you who have not been following all of the ways that you can stay updated on where we are with the comprehensive master plan and continue to give input and feedback along the way. So we're here this evening. We thank you again. We know probably you've had a long day as well, but we're looking forward to engaging in a robust conversation. So thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. And quickly, before we get going on the question and answers, we're going to run through the presentation, same presentation that we gave at the last Q&A back in mid-December, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. As part of this, during this, I know, the reason everyone's here is for questions and answers. So if you could please type your questions in the chat. That way it's going to be a lot easier for us to see them, run through them, kind of consolidate them together. If there are similar questions, it's going to be a little bit easier for us to answer them more quickly. And it also gives us a chance to go back and any questions that we didn't have an opportunity to see, go back and try and answer them on the CMP webpage, which there will be links to in the chat. So if you can, while Barbara's giving her presentation, or even when we get into the questions and answers, if you have a question, please do type it in the chat. Barbara?
Sure, thank you. Richard, if you'll start the PowerPoint. I'm going to go through this really briefly. First, let me say again, Happy New Year. Thanks to Hans. Thank you, everybody. I am going to do this quickly. I think most of you have seen this, but just for the few of you that haven't, just to bring you up to date with where we are and sort of tell you where we ended up with the recommendations. And the 2 or 3 things I always say with this, first of all, thank you, because I know we've been talking to some of you since last December, and I really appreciate all of your input, and hopefully it's reflected in where we've ended up. So that's the first thing. Thank you. The second thing is really just to say these are recommendations. These are not finals at all. We're still looking for your input. These are the recommendations from the consensus of what we've heard from everybody. And thirdly, remember, this is a 2031 plan. This is not happening tomorrow. So let me quickly go through the recommended projects. I sort of put them by type here so you could see them. And just to reiterate, we are recommending that we move Hightower to the Chamblee cluster and Ashford Park to the Cross Keys cluster. And again, these will not happen tomorrow. They will happen, after some of our projects are built and the balance of kids and the feeder patterns begin to work out. We also are suggesting that we consolidate some of the clusters in region 3 and 5 and possibly redistrict to deal with the underutilization. I think you all will remember we have way overcrowding sort of in region 1 and region 4, region 1, region 2, and region 4. And we have underutilization in region 3, 3 and 5, and some in 6 and 7. So we want to deal with the overcrowding as well as the underutilization. The other thing, the other big cluster move is building Sequoia High School, building a new middle school and a new Sequoia High School. So we really get a whole new cluster in region 1. Next one, please. And then just some of the other by type projects we are recommending. We are recommending the creation of a career academy at McNair, a cyber academy at Towers, and then the Performing Arts Academy expanded at the Avondale High School site. We also are recommending that Wadsworth and Kittredge both go to 4 through 8. I think Wadsworth we can do more quickly than Kittredge. We sort of have to wait till some of our schools get consolidated or rebuilt to find a place to move Kittredge so it can expand. But Wadsworth has the space that it can expand rather quickly. We could do that in the next year or so. The other thing we have talked about and recommended are the conversions to K-8s at Austin, at the new Chamblee Dunwoody School, and then at Smoke Rise. And again, I think you all know, we recommended those for academic reasons, as well as for the fact that they have empty seats. And by filling those seats with some 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, we don't have to build new classrooms at those middle schools that they feed. Next one, please. And I know that the K-8s is a topic that's still out there, and the district is working through it and, seeing how to implement it, when to implement it, what the program is. So I know there's conversation there. And then just to reiterate the new construction projects, we've already started really the design. We've gone back to the architects who looked at this before and are beginning to think about starting the design on the repurposed Cross Keys High School. We're looking at a new Cross Keys Middle School, the new Sequoia High School, which would be a totally new high school, the replacement of Sequoia Middle School, 3 new elementaries that are all 3 overcrowded and in very poor shape: Stoneview, Idlewood, Jolly. And then following that, the elementaries, Hightower, Ashford Park, Farrington, and Chapel Hill. And then to deal with the overcrowding and the demographics, we're recommending building a new middle school for Clarkston, close to the high school, and then a new and repurposed Clarkston High School, hopefully using parts of that building. We also are recommending a new Druid Hills High School addition renovation, and that's been talked about for a long time. And then Stone Mountain Classroom Addition and the Performing Arts Academy at Avondale site. So that's the new construction. Next slide, please. And then the consolidations, we still are recommending these consolidations. None of this will happen immediately. And I know there's still conversation about some of these. The one that's probably most pressing is their Cary Reynolds in Dresden, because the sooner we can get that consolidated, it opens up the Sequoia site and we can build the Sequoia High School and Middle School. And then the early learning centers, we'd like to do an early learning center in every region. These are the schools we've suggested doing it at because they have the fewest number of students in those schools. As time goes on in the next 5 years or so, they may end up in other schools in those regions, but we just really want to get one in every region. Next, please. And then the timeline. I think this is the other thing you all have been curious about. Next, please. Just sort of the priorities for projects. The things that we'd like to get done as soon as possible is really relocating Cary Reynolds so we can begin to think about developing that Sequoia site, expanding Wadsworth, and then doing the design for the Performing Arts Center. That project was started years ago and went on hold. And while we may not have the money to build it immediately, we would like to start the design again and restart it. Then the next sort of priority projects that we'd like to see happen before 2025 is the new Cross Keys High School, or the repurposed Cross Keys High School, the new Cross Keys Middle, the new Sequoia High School, the new Sequoia Middle, and then get that consolidation of Cary Reynolds and Dresden done. And then similarly, in the next 5 years, if possible, the K-8s at Austin, Dunwoody, Chamblee, and Smoke Rise, And then there's other 3 elementaries that are really pressing in the condition and the overcrowding. And the Druid Hills renovation addition, again, another project that was started and went on hold. And then the Career Academy at McNair, the Cyber Academy at Towers, and Create a Flex Academy. With all the virtual learning, we need a place for the teachers to teach from. So as we begin to consolidate schools, we're looking for a place for the Flex Academy. And then the other projects that are designated further out would be the new Ashford Park, the new High Tower, the new Clarkston Middle, the repurposed Clarkston High School, the renovation at Stone Mountain. They need a classroom addition and renovation. The new Performing Arts Academy, the construction would be further out. The design would be in the next few years, and then construction later on. And then the consolidations and the other new elementaries. So basically that's just sort of, again, that's recommendations. That's where we sort of are at this point in time with the CMP. And it's sort of from the consolidation of everything we've heard from everyone in the consensus, those are our recommendations. So at that point, I think that is all I have to present, just to bring you up to sort of where we are at this point in time. And now let's open it up for questions, which I think is the point of this.
Thank you, Barbara. And I think it's important to note the next steps, as was about to be shown. You don't have to put it back up, but concretely, the next steps of the CMP are there'll be a presentation to the board at the January board meeting here this next Monday. Really a lot of the same information that you've seen as far as here's the recommendations from the CMP, but then a bit more about how implementation will happen. It's important to remember that all of the recommendations of the comprehensive master plan are at this stage recommendations. And even once the board accepts the CMP, each one of those items will still require board action. And so the district will need to align our capital improvement program, what we use to fund the building of new schools, with the recommendations of the CMP, and then especially any programmatic changes like the K-8s, like the new programs that are recommended, like the early learning centers in every region. All of that will require both separate board action, and in most of those cases, there'll be an engagement process or an exploratory period around that, especially things like the K-8s, which is something this district hasn't done for decades. So there's a process that the district will need to go through to begin implementing some of these recommendations. So with that, I think now's a good time to start opening up for questions.
Thank you so much, Hans. Thank you, Barbara. Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Harris. I serve as the Deputy Superintendent for Community Empowerment, Innovation, and Partnerships. And I am so glad to be with you this evening and be able to support with facilitating the questions and answers. I love it that the questions are already flowing through the chat. I had a chance to breeze through really quickly. I'm going to jump to the request that came from Hawthorne Elementary School. We would be happy to visit meet with the Hawthorne Elementary School PAC. Ms. Champion is on the call right now, and she and her team will be in touch to make sure that we identify the right date and time. What I'll try to do in going through the Q&A is, focus, try to buckle things together where it relates to certain schools, and then try to get to at least every school community that's here. And then if we have to circle back, we circle back. So the first question that came in is from Hawthorne, and Mr. Williams and Mr. Boyd, I am going to read the question as is. I think it is a little bit for both of you in here. We also are joined by Richard Boyd, who is our interim Chief Operating Officer. He's on the line as well. So here's the question. There is $198 million beyond what was expected. Of this, will Hawthorne receive the $4.5 million that has been promised in the last 3 East blocks for long overdue maintenance, HVAC, roof repair, plumbing repair, and bathroom fixtures? If not, what is the reason for denying Hawthorne the money that had been allocated to our school, and how will Hawthorne be expected to function for the next 4 to 8 years without this urgent necessary maintenance?
Absolutely. And this is a good one because there are several schools like Hawthorne where there's a recommendation for some action to be taken at the school, but that recommendation is in the longer term, in the 10 years. Or it's a school like, for example, Kittredge, the facility they're currently in. And this isn't called out in the slides that have been seen, but we've been talking with the Kittredge community, and it's very evident that that facility is not an appropriate long-term facility for Kittredge. They have portables currently with the recommendation to go to grades 4 through 8. There's no way that that can fit in the current facility. And so there's an expectation that that school will move. I think Barbara even mentioned it. That school will move when another facility, an appropriate facility, becomes available, but that's not something that's going to happen in the immediate future. And so the question is, well, what do we do with these facilities in the meantime? Hawthorne, Dunair, I cannot remember all of them, but there's several schools that fall into this category of schools that we want to replace or that we no longer want to be using in 10 years. But in the meantime, there's absolutely immediate capital needs there. There's roofs that need to be replaced. There are HVAC systems that need repairs. There's plumbing fixtures that need to be replaced. And so part of the aligning of our capital improvement program with the recommendations is making sure that there's a set aside specifically for these schools so that those capital, in many cases, it's the same improvements that were originally planned will continue forward, but under this grouped together project. For example, I cannot remember which school it was, but there's a school that I think Farrington, Ashford Park is another one, where there's already improvements planned. We've already begun in some cases. We have architects on board. We've planned out, here's what the improvements would be. And there's a good chance that a significant amount of what is planned will happen because they're necessary even for the next 5 years for those facilities to continue forward. And so that's the idea, that we'll look at each of these facilities on a case-by-case basis and say, not just what needed to scrape by to make sure the facility doesn't fall down, but what is really necessary to keep these successful facilities for the entire time that we're going to continue to have them, even if we know in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years that we want to tear it down and replace it with a brand new facility. It still needs to be a fully functional facility ready for students to be there and to be successful learners the entire time. And we want to make sure that that happens. And so there will be changes to the structure. Right now there's an independent project just for Hawthorne that is going to be folded in, but at the same time, there's still a commitment to make sure that schools like Hawthorne get the work that they need to make sure that they're still successful functional facilities for that time period.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. The next question, for Chamblee High School, it is recommended that Ashford Park be moved to the Chamblee cluster, while Hightower will be moved into the, moved from the Chamblee cluster, while Hightower will be moved into the Chamblee cluster. How will this alleviate overcrowding at Chamblee High School?
The key thing to remember is the new Sequoia High School. When that happens, there will be a massive redistricting in the entirety of Region 1. It will include things like the recommendation in the CMP is to move Hightower, but to be honest, with all of these redistrictings, there will be a separate redistricting process the year before that capacity opens up. So the year before the high school opens, that will look at all of the attendance lines and very likely not just the high school, but also all of the attendance lines in Region 1 to say, how do we balance students across all of these with the new capacity, the hundreds of seats of new capacity that new school will open up, so that we don't we minimize overcrowding, or hopefully don't have any overcrowding at all through all 4 at that point of the high schools in Region 1. So whether that takes the form of Ashford Park moving to Cross Keys and Hightower moving to Chamblee, even with that, or whatever other moves need to happen to make that happen. But even with that, it's important to keep in mind that there's a high likelihood that, especially with the new school opening at the Shallowford site, there's a high likelihood, and the middle schools that are also being built, there's a high likelihood that even the elementary school attendance areas might change. That's not guaranteed. All of this requires a separate redistricting process. But what it means for a school like Hightower to move to Chamblee, or Ashford Park to Cross Keys, or whatever the school's called, that may look a bit different. If you live on the edges of Ashford Park, whether you stay in Ashford Park, or whether you move with everybody else, or whether everything stays the same for you, all of that will be discussed as part of that redistricting process, because there are enough moving parts, there are enough new facilities, new capacity that we have built and are building and will build in that area over the next 3-4 years.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. So the next question, and we're going to stay in the Chamblee cluster. This question, I think, relates, but it's specifically around Chamblee Dunwoody. Please help clarify the current recommendation for the new Chamblee Dunwoody school. Will this school definitely move into the Chamblee cluster, or is this still under review? This is a major point of concern for many people and would help to have clarity.
The best answer is, take a step back. It is a recommendation of the CMP that it move in. However, I think it's also very important to remember that, as I've said, all recommendations, especially redistrictings and moving of schools from one cluster to another, will require a separate process. That won't happen until new capacity is available, as in the new Sequoia High School opens. And so in 2 or 3 years, when that school opens, things will look different than they do now. And they may look different than even our expectations of what that will be. And so there is an open question of, will that school move? Does that school and Hightower move, one or the other? Is there a need for both? Or will the Dunwoody cluster be fine with only one school moving out? I think given the overcrowding in the Dunwoody cluster, both historically and expected, there's absolutely a school is going to move. Very likely it's Hightower, given where it is geographically. But again, all of that needs to be determined as part of that redistricting process. I know that isn't a definite answer, and it's uncomfortable to go for the next few years not having that definite answer. I will say that personally, when I look at it, I question whether there's an absolute need for that school to move out of the Dunwoody cluster. But at the same time, I don't know. And right now, as I've said, our expectations for what that cluster, both the Dunwoody cluster and the Chamblee cluster, will look like in 3 years, the reality may be a bit different. And so it's important to keep that in mind as we move forward with this. So the best answer right now is, I'm not sure if it will need to, but stay tuned. When that redistricting happens, all of these things will be looked at.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And so again, just super important to impress upon everyone. And when we get to that process, we will be working very closely with PACs, and we will keep everyone involved in the conversation, and meetings. So we're going to get a chance to get to know each other very, very, very well.
Yes.
So that
I was going to say, since we are talking to PACs specifically today, I think it's important to, I've been through several redistricting processes, and it's, I think it's worth saying that when we get letters from PACs, or especially from groups of PACs, from a whole cluster coming together and saying, here is what our vision for what we think this area should be, either just our school, or this group of schools that's being looked at for redistricting, or this whole cluster, or even a group of clusters, that carries a lot of weight. It means that the people who represent these schools have come together, discussed it, and are passing it along. So do keep that in mind, that when we get to these redistricting conversations in a few years, or even next fall, I think the redistricting for the new school at the Shallowford site, the redistricting will happen next fall for the school opening fall 23. We'll be relying on the PACs in the area, especially for their for their feedback, for their statements, to say, here is our vision for our school and for our area, because your voices carry a lot of weight.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. What exactly is what does it mean to be underutilized? And I just want to note that Jared or Stephen did answer in the chat, but would love for you to just explain it to everyone here in case they didn't read the chat.
Sure. And so there's a relatively arbitrary definition that we've used with the CMP, which is about 70%. I think that's what you see on the maps. But fundamentally, it really comes down to the idea that as a system of schools, not just an individual school, having a school below a certain threshold, we say 70, but when you look at a school that's half empty, then if it's just an individual school, then there's this sense of, well, that's okay. It's okay if there's empty rooms. The students are still being taught. There's still there's lots of available space, and it means that there's room to grow. But as a system, it also means that resources are, which, as we know, unfortunately, as a school system, we do deal with limited resources compared to what we wish we had. It means that resources are going towards those empty spaces. That's, as a district, we need to look and say, well, is there a way, would it be better to have them go, have these schools be balanced? It's hard to say, because what it's being underutilized on its own isn't really so much a problem. It's when we have underutilization in some areas and overutilization in others. That's really when it becomes an issue, because for example, when the Georgia DOE looks at our plans to build a whole new school, we want to build a new Sequoia High School. They look at it and they say, well, as an entire district with nearly 100,000 students and over 20 high schools, why do you want to build a new high school? Your utilization for all of high school is relatively low. You have plenty of open seats. And it becomes a bit of a challenge where, are we using or balancing our resources appropriately? In this particular case, we're such a large district geographically that we end up, there are areas of our county that are very overutilized, that we don't have enough capacity. We have portable classrooms, and where there's underutilization, available classrooms is so far away that redistricting to that level, to that extent, is just not just unfeasible, but we've actually, I've looked at it, and to effectively redistrict so that we were fully utilizing every single facility using just attendance areas, there would be whole schools where their attendance area, the school itself would be outside of its own attendance area. Just because of the concentration of students, where they are, where they're not, where our school facilities are. So that's I know a longer definition, but it is something to keep in mind, because it's easy to see when a school's overutilized. Oh, there's portables outside. There's not enough capacity. My teacher doesn't have their own room. But underutilization isn't, when you think of it, well, I wouldn't mind being in a school where, half the classrooms are empty, because there's enough room to do whatever we need. And if there's a sudden growth of students happens, then we're ready for it. But as a district, especially when there is overutilization in other schools, that can become an issue. And that's why we look at, well, how do we balance students, whether it be through special programs, consolidation of schools into a new school, whatever their strategies are, how do we balance our resources, balance our capacities, so that we're making sure that all of the resources are available for as many students as possible, for as much success as possible.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. And then just adding one other point here for underutilization. If you look at the larger presentation that's available on the website, you'll see a list of schools that have been identified as underutilized. Please know that if your PAC or if your school is on that list, we do anticipate coming out to speak with the PACs as well as the clusters, so that we can work together to figure out what's the best idea to support the children in that community, and how do we get the strongest programs in those clusters, so that we can ensure that we are maximizing capacity and we're giving the children everything that they need. So definitely looking forward to coming out and having those conversations later on in the calendar year. The next question that has come up is regarding Kittredge Magnet. Why isn't KMS on the low SCA list? We have an SCA score of 55.4.
So 55.4 actually is relatively low. It's not as low as might be expected. We've put several $1 million into that facility over the last several years. But at the same time, you know, as I said before, that school absolutely does have needs. And a lot of the needs of that facility, I think there's two issues when it comes to the facility condition assessments, specifically at Kittredge. One is just broader with the facility condition assessments. If I remember correctly, with the final scores that was put out by Jacobs, the lowest scores were in the high 40s. So 54 is relatively low for a lot of our schools. But for Kittredge specifically, that facility, while it absolutely has needs, I think there's a roof need, there's still some HVAC needs there. With the work that has been put in, it did help edge it up. But we could put in, you know, tens of millions of dollars into that facility, and it still wouldn't be the school that Kittredge needs. So as I mentioned before, there is absolutely an expectation that that school is going to, that program is going to need to move to a different facility that can better house it. There's also a recognition, you know, Kittredge is on the list of schools that I mentioned before, that where we're looking to say, what does this school need to keep it going to be as successful as possible over the next several years until that school moves out? Because yeah, regardless of its facility condition score, we know, we have our maintenance folks are there every day. We know what the condition of these schools are, and we know what the needs are. And we know that these schools absolutely do need work. They can't just sit with nothing additional being done for the next 5 years. So even with the score that Kittredge has, we recognize the needs, and we will be looking at the Kittredge facility to say, how can we bolster this up, put some more work into it, make sure that it has what it needs so that it can be a successful facility, so that facility can serve a successful school until that school can move out.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. And just a secondary question that I'll add on to Kittredge is, when do you expect Kittredge to convert to a 4th through 8th grade?
When a different space is identified, whether it be through consolidation of other schools that will open up a different elementary facility, or any other facility, we'll be looking at that with an eye towards when that move happens, it can be at that point become a K-8 school. So we don't want to move the school into a facility that just barely holds the current program and then say, oh wait, now that we've done it, how do we now move to a 4-8? If we're going to go through the hassle of moving the whole school, we're going to move it to become what we want it to be in its final form. And so when that move happens, and again, we haven't identified specific space yet, when that move happens, that's when it will hopefully be able to progress from 4-6 to 4-8.
Thank you so much. Can you oh, nope, I skipped something. We are requesting that Rainbow Elementary be considered for a performing arts pre-K through 5th grade magnet school. Just lifting that up. The next one is, can you briefly explain what the cyber technology high school will consist of at Towers?
I think I am the wrong person to ask that, because while there's an idea that Barbara might actually be able to speak to some of the examples that gave rise to this recommendation as far as what those schools do. But I'm a facilities person, I'm in operations. And so that will need to be decided. What is the curriculum of these new programs at Towers and at McNair? That will need to be decided before the schools open, so that we can advertise them and say, not just, oh, hey, come to this new program because we made a new program. We say, no, come to this new program because it has these awesome things, and this is what we're doing, and this is how we're going to lift up our students. So Barbara, do you think you can speak a little bit about—
I'll just jump in. We have done a couple schools lately, and we're doing one in Alabama right now that is a cyber technology, a magnet school. And we are finding many of the systems we're working in their career tech departments are finding that this is a hot career, and there are jobs that are needed, and there are lots of kids who really want to go into this, who are doing computer programming that's moving into cyber technology and cybersecurity. So when we were looking at programs to sort of enrich the magnet programs, we suggested this, and the curriculum people in DeKalb County said this would be a great idea, but we said, we will let you talk to we will try and facilitate a conversation with the cyber school in Alabama and Huntsville, obviously in Huntsville, where they have all the aerospace industries. They're very keen on this, and try and get them to see other schools' curriculums. But I think, it will be a year or so in the making while they decide on this curriculum. But our real impetus was to say, this is a magnet program that seems to be attracting a tremendous amount of young people and has a lot of job opportunity. So that's why we put it out there, and it got lots of enthusiasm from the curriculum folks.
Thank you so much. And I would just only add one thing around just our vision of a DeKalb graduate and how we're constantly looking toward careers of the future to ensure that we're preparing our students for future success. And so as we look to bring this cyber technology academy to our district, as Barbara said, we'll definitely be looking at our partners, but we already have university partners that are super excited, as we are a very big university belt. We have partners that are excited to work with us, and we will be pulling together a committee that's inclusive of business, university partners, and others to come together so that we can design the school that we want to see for our community. So that's just the only one thing to add. Remember, I'm the partnerships person, so I'm always talking about how we're going to bring everyone together. The next question is, what consideration was given to turning the current Druid Hills High School facility into an IB High Achievers Magnet School without an attendance zone? Seems like this might solve the problem of inadequate athletic facilities and concerns that some parents have about being zoned to a high school that is on the edge of the district.
Looking at Druid Hills High School, absolutely, we did look at that as far as, would this be an appropriate location for a magnet school? And then we'd have to rearrange what other high schools, maybe turn Druid Hills Middle back into a high school, or utilize the Avondale High School or middle school sites, whatever that would look like. Ultimately, we settled on leaving it as the high school that it currently is, as a neighborhood high school with an attendance area. However, the idea of renewing that facility, which is what the recommendation is, it's a little bit hard to communicate in the short language we have in that presentation, but the idea is to renovate the existing facility, and then there's parts of the facility, especially the old, I believe, elementary portion of it, and maybe the gym, I'm not sure, we'll have to look at that need essentially to be torn down and rebuilt. They're very old, but at the same time, they're not like the 1929 original high school that has that really historic and iconic frontage. We want to maintain that, and especially the newer addition that's been done. But there are parts in the back of the building that really just need to be replaced. They were originally built to be elementary classrooms, and it's not as appropriate as we would want for 21st century high school. So that's what the recommendation is to not so much add on to the building, but there would be a tear down and rebuild of an addition. You get the idea there. The idea with that renewal of the Druid Hills High School facility is so that it would be ready for whatever Druid Hills High School needs to be for the next several decades, whether that is that neighborhood school that it currently is, or if it moves on to become something else in the future. So that is something we looked at. We did settle on leaving it as it is for now, but if that's a conversation that the Druid Hills community wants to have with the district, we work in planning cycles of about 5 years. And so I'd say is start those conversations now. Don't expect something to happen right away. The focus of the CMP is, or the CMP has helped focus the district on knowing what we want and what the district's vision is for the next 10 years. But at the same time, in another 5 years, when we're planning for SPLOS 7, we'll absolutely have the CMP, but the district, no organization, no district should look and say, well, this is what we planned 5 or 6 years ago. We'll just do that exactly. We'll take a look and say, is there anything new that has come up? Here is our baseline. How does this need to change to better match the vision of the district now as we move forward? So I want to encourage the Druid Hills community, or any communities out there, that if you have a vision for your school programming, start that conversation, get it going, talk with your principals, talk with your leadership, because that's how, when those ideas percolate up, that's what then gets planned and built into the next major 5-year or 10-year plan.
Thank Thank you so much, Mr. Williams. Has there been consideration given to a Stone Mountain Elementary School for a new school?
Yes, and I believe it was in there because there wasn't a specific site identified. It wasn't as clearly spelled out, but there is a recommendation to combine Stone Mountain and Stone Mill elementaries to a new, in both together in one new school. As again, we don't have a specific site identified. Both Stone Mountain and Stone Mill sites aren't exactly appropriate for that new combined school. But that's something that we're looking at for the, not this next 5 years, but the 5 years after. And so in the meantime, between now and planning for SPLOST 7 in 5 years, we'll be looking at, well, what sites might be available, whether it's district-owned sites or whether it's something else. We need to go out and purchase land. We try to keep things just done to district-owned sites as much as we can. The district has a lot of sites, but at the same time, it depends on what's available in the area, how we're using our facilities, that sort of thing. So the short answer is yes, we absolutely have looked at that. That is a recommendation in the CMP, but it's for the 5 to 10 year time frame, not the next 5 years.
Thank you so much. Who has the contract for these projects? What was the process for selection?
So all of the projects that are in the CMP, I think maybe with the exception of Cross Keys, there isn't we don't have architects on board. We don't have contractors on board. These are projects that we would be funding, that we will, the SPLOST 6 especially, and with the modifications we make to our whole capital improvement program, which includes SPLOST 5, SPLOST 6, all of that. The funding will be creating these projects or changing the scopes of current projects to expand them to be, for example, a new Dresden Elementary School for the combination of Cary Reynolds and Dresden. That funding change needs to be approved by the board. You'll see more details about that at the board meeting on Monday, and then as that gets presented to the board in February for approval. As far as what the funding will look like. Once that funding is approved, then we can move out with requests for proposals for architects who will design all those big projects. And then once there's a design, we can put that design out as a bid for contractors. So it will take some time, and almost all of the big projects that are mentioned in the CMP don't have specific architects or contractors on board yet.
Thank you, sir. The PAC at Peachtree Middle strongly suggested K through 6 for all feeders to address equity in educational, athletic, and extracurricular activity while addressing overcrowding. Why is it not being considered? If indeed K through 8 schools offer advantages to students, why would those be isolated only to Austin and the new Dunwoody Chambly schools? K through 6 feeders seem more equitable.
So with K-8s especially, the recommendations that are coming out of the CMP are, these are recommendations that, yes, there's a whole team, the leadership, the district leadership as well that has gone into these recommendations, but fundamentally the recommendation is to consider K-8s for district schools. The schools that are listed in the CMP are the most likely because they have available capacity in areas where there is a need for capacity, and K-8 might be able to help with that. But really it's to look at alternate grade configurations, specifically K-8, because of the advantages that can give to the district in how students are arranged, all that sort of thing. What that means is for the DeKalb County School District is that we need to look at this. This is a new K-8. This isn't, I think one of the hardest things to wrap our heads around is that over the last several months when considering K-8s, is that the K-8s of today are not the K-8s of 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. It isn't just an extension of elementary that goes up, that there is true middle school programming in a K-8 environment. And so what that means is not every school is an appropriate, not every facility is appropriate for a K-8. And then also, what does it really mean to have middle school programming in an K-8 or elementary school or K-8 environment? That's something that this district needs to look at, that our curriculum folks need to look at and have a vision for. This is what K-8 means to us. And then this is where that can be appropriately implemented. And so that's something the district will be looking at over the next year, I think, especially, and there'll be conversations about that in the coming up fall about what does K-8 look to the district? Where would it be appropriate to implement that? And I think as part of that conversation, the idea of, well, what would a K-6 look like? Is it possible to do the appropriate middle school programming, but only for 6th grade? All of these questions absolutely need to be addressed. And I think will be part of that exploration of what does K-8 look like? And it'll very likely not just be K-8, but what is an appropriate grade configuration for each of our schools individually? Are there schools where different grade configurations make sense?
Thank you so much. The next question, are there any considerations for the Snapfinger Elementary School?
I don't think that there's specific, let me take a look here. A lot of our schools are going to be having work done, capital improvements done that aren't called out on the CMP. CARES is a big source. We have over $100 million of CARES funds that are going just to capital improvements. That's on top of the maintenance staff. That's on top of work that's being done specifically to decrease our open work orders. I mean, just new roofs, new HVAC systems, there's over $100 million. And so many of our schools, whether it be through SPLOST funding, existing or new, or CARES, many of our schools will be getting some sort of major capital improvement as needed. But as far as the large recommendations for the CMP, I don't think there's anything at Snapfinger. Let me double check real quick to see what we're currently being looked at for Snapfinger.
Thank you. For the sake of time, is that something that we could come back to if we can't do it quickly? Because there are a lot of other questions.
Absolutely.
In here.
No, please.
All right. So then just jumping down, there's a thank you from Laurel Ridge for the HVAC and roof repairs. However, there's a question from Peachtree Middle regarding the need for HVAC repairs as well as roof repairs. So just calling it out, certainly I know that this is under consideration. There's also concerns coming from Panola Way Elementary School about the septic tank, and also just wondering what type of repairs could be made to Panola Way. Jumping to a question that I think could be on the mind of many, will the new redesigned performing arts school be a K through 12 or just a high school? DSA has been on East Bluff's plan several times. Why has the addition redesign been pushed out to the end of this current decade?
So that was another one that was difficult to communicate with the short slides that we had. The intention with the art school, so first, whether it's K-12 or just high school, the focus is on making sure that the high school is available first, making sure that that is an appropriate replacement for DeKalb School of the Arts. But there absolutely is a vision for a full K-12 art school. What that will look like will depend a lot on the design and the implementation when, as we're implementing this. And whether it's a phased design that does the high school first and then a K-8 comes in later, or even if it's just let's really focus strong on the 9-12 and keep the DeKalb Elementary School of the Arts where it is. I think that will come out as part of this design process as the district is looking at, now that we know we want not just let's squish these two schools together at an existing school and try to maybe add on an addition, which is something we've dared to do in the past. There's a much better vision for, no, we want a true, new facility specifically appropriate for the performing arts. Now that we have that vision, we can move into design as quickly as we can, as quickly as possible. That will then dictate, here is what the vision for this school, for this whole site will be over the next several years. The funding for the building of the school is listed in the 5 to 10 year time range, only because the true vision for that actually is we want to get the design of the performing arts school done as quickly as we can so that we can go out and try and get outside funding outside of what the district is used to. As a district, we are very used to funding, especially our bigger projects, either through our own funding through SPLOST or through bringing in revenues through the Georgia Department of Education, but through our traditional funding sources. But for an art school, we really as a district, and I think the board has talked about, but as we really want to look at, is there outside funding? Is there a way that we can bring in partners to help us fund building this performing arts school? Something that can really be a jewel of the, not just DeKalb, but the Atlanta area, the state, and maybe even the nation for performing arts. And so getting a design done as quickly as possible may help us accelerate getting that funding, and that funding will help us pull forward that, rather than the 5 to 10 year time frame, which is really only on there because that's when we can guarantee it. If nobody else helps us out, if the DeKalb DCSD is funding this all on our own, we know that we can build it in the next 10 years, but maybe not in the next 5. But if we can get outside funding, if we can get those partners in, then we can pull it forward and we can really begin to do this much more quickly. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. Again, it's hard to show that in 1 or 2 slides, though.
Thank you so much, Hans. And one of the things that I see coming up a lot is that there are a lot of people that want to meet with us. We're so happy that you like us and you want us to come out. There are requests for potentially if we could do these meetings as a region or a cluster. I think that there could be consideration to pull together cluster meetings as well. First, starting with those clusters that could be impacted by more immediate changes, and then moving to other clusters. Additionally, we recognize your need and our community's need to want to know more about K-8 and be involved in the planning for the future. And we guarantee that you will be involved in the planning for the future. And as PAC and as leaders of our community, we definitely will be coming back to you through the leadership of Ms. Stacy Stepney, our CAO, to talk more about programming. There's a question in here that actually kind of lends itself to what is the purpose of the CMP, and when do we get to talk about programming and academics and so forth? And I guarantee you that it's coming. And again, while these are recommendations that are being made, this is looking toward 2031. And so we're doing this in chunks. And I think that Mr. Williams could talk maybe a little bit about like what would the community see first, and then recognizing that our longer term plans will be around K-8 and addressing redistricting. But if we can just give a little preview for what could the community see for February, and then we'll just go ahead and close it out.
Sure. As for February, the only changes for this upcoming school year that are being recommended are increasing the grade configuration of Wadsworth Magnet from 4.6 to 4.8, because that's something that school absolutely, there's enough capacity there. They can begin implementing that as soon as the district allows. The other one is a recommended move of Carrie Reynolds to where Dunwoody Upper Grades currently is, the former Nancy Creek site, that would allow the current Carrie Reynolds facility to be used for immediate relief of Sequoia, but also that school site will be part of the new Sequoia Middle and High School site. So because it is eventually going to become part of that anyway, this will help provide immediate relief to Sequoia. It'll put Carrie Reynolds in a swing space, is what we call it, but a temporary space, while we begin design and construction on a new combined Dresden and Carrie Reynolds at the Dresden site. Those are the only 2 things as far as major moves that you can expect to see the board look at and approve for this next upcoming school year. The other thing that you'll see is that realignment of our capital improvement program that I mentioned, funding the projects that you'll begin to see in 2023 and 4 and 5 and so on. The first step of that, after saying this is what we want to do, is to fund it so that we can really begin going out and hiring architects, hiring contractors. That's what you'll also see coming up especially the February board meeting. And then
Thank you, sir.
as you said, the comprehensive master plan is really what it has become is the beginning of a conversation, an ongoing conversation, where the district, as a district, we look at, not just what is it that we want for facilities, but also what do we want for our programs? What do we want our students? We look at all the different components of a school district. And so what that means is a lot of these conversations, we're districting special programs, that's the word I was looking for our special programs, our magnets, we'll be talking about a lot of this, after the CMP. The CMP officially is going to end in February when the board when the board accepts it and begins implementation. But in reality, we're looking at changes to the way in operations, to the way that we communicate the condition of our facilities. Because traditionally that's something that, once every 5 years, we put out a big report and it says, here's all the problems. And other than that, all you've really got is here's our open work orders. And that's not an effective way of communicating. Here's the issues we know we have with our facilities and how we plan to address them. So we're based on what this whole process going through the CMP, we're looking at how can we change our reports and our communication. I've seen, as a district, we're also looking at how can we look at our vision for special programs and what that means for all of our schools, and begin having those conversations now and then over the next year. Same thing with grade configuration, same thing with redistricting starting this next fall. Really, I see the CMP as the beginning of a much larger conversation the district is having with itself of where do we want to be. It's just for this first part of it, we're focusing a bit more on facilities because of the funding that we currently have that we're about to begin. But really, it is everything, it's comprehensive.
Thank you so much, Hans. Just adding for Carrie Reynolds, Mrs. Warren, I see your questions here, and note that we'll definitely be circling back with the Carrie Reynolds PAC, and I'm certain that Mr. Williams, and I know for myself, if there's a meeting that the Carrie Reynolds community wants to have so that we can talk in advance of over these next couple of weeks, we definitely will make ourselves available. We enjoy meeting with you all. And so please look forward to many more opportunities to communicate. Again, just reiterating again, this is the start of the process, not the end. I think that we're going to have a lot of more evenings together as we figure out what's best for our school community. And so with that, we thank you for your questions. For the questions that we did not get to this evening, they will be posted online as it relates to getting in touch with Mr. Williams, as well as me, so that we can come and meet with your PACs or set up cluster meetings. We will be working through our governance team, and that's through Ms. Champion and her team. So look to hear more. We're going to start from the, we're going to be out there, and we're looking forward to meeting with you all. Superintendent, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harris. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you to our friends at Perkins and Will. And thank you to all of our parents that came on and asked such great questions. As the team has shared, we hope that this is the beginning of multiple conversations to come. Thank you to those who have emailed and reached out about invitations to your PAC meetings. That's why we wanted to go ahead and have this meeting so that everyone knows that we're open to that. And if you send us the invitation, if you think that there's a need to have deeper conversations with your PAC, that we want to make ourselves available. There are no secrets here. We want to make sure that this process works for everyone. And at the end of the day, that we have facilities that meet the needs of our scholars, and most importantly, that all of our scholars have access to high quality, innovative educational programs. So we know that we have a beautifully diverse district, and it isn't going to be a one size fits all. We want to have diversity and variety in terms of what our students have access to. So we just appreciate you very, very much. Again, Happy New Year. I recognize some of your faces. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for nodding affirmatively. Thank you for looking critically and letting us know we have work to do. We want you to know that we sincerely appreciate you, and thank you so much for being in community with us tonight. Thank you.